and welcome to sunny Glasgow. My name is Karen Phillips. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for the Respiratory Interventions Group at Medtronic. And on behalf of Medtronic, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this event this evening. We have a fantastic panel this evening under the fine leadership of my friend and colleague, Dr. Alistair McNary.
First up is our own Scottish Barry McGRATH, immediate past president of the Difficult Airway Society, genuine airway guru, but in this weather he'd rather be out riding his bike, so we're very grateful to have him for a whole 10 minutes. Barry, thanks for coming. Over to you.
My talk was on implementation of video laryngoscopy with a particular reference to sustainability. I think the argument for video laryngoscopy versus direct laryngoscopy is already won, but what I think we do need to speak about is sustainability. So we're speaking about environmental impact, and the impact starts at resource and finishes at disposal in terms of environmental impact. So it's a life cycle analysis that we're going to consider. And then moving to implementation, which involves a concerted educational information process to bring all your colleagues on side, which isn't always as straightforward as you might think, because you're a huge enthusiastic individual with regards to video laryngoscopy, whereas some of your colleagues might not be. There's lots of debate that still goes on, bougie, non-bougie, stiletted tube, non-stiletted tube. We have to be crystal clear with that, otherwise we'll get confusion and we'll get more naysayers. So I think my message is you need to invest time and energy in implementation and consider the environment, sustainability, cleaning and so on in the bigger picture to get the right device and the right model moving forward within your department.
It's a great pleasure and it's an honor to have been invited here as a Swiss, and we're very neutral, so we're neither against nor for. On the contrary.
The summary of the lecture today is use every day the same devices that you use when it's difficult, expected or not. By that, you will have less problems for our patients, so use the devices every day, and by that you get much better using them.
And this is an example of a complex intubation. It's an interlying tracheal inlet, and what we see all of a sudden, besides that the patient is badly paralyzed, although everything was done right, we see how the tube goes into the anatomy. And it's not just pull-push, it's show and make the tube go into the patient's anatomy. And this is the specifics. Every single patient has a different anatomy, and there's not one size fits all. It allows us to understand that the intubation is not just a visualization, which is no problem with the hyperangulated blade or with the MAC, depending. And then you need to bring inside in front, and then you need to bring the tube in there. And when I assess my airways with my patients, with my residents, I said, try to think which one of these three will be difficult, and then try to use the best device for all of them to make them easy. We are maybe losing some key experience in some other devices, so we need to bridge the bridge and still keep teaching. Thank you very much.
For my lecture today, the main points, a summary, is that I'm here because in our department we implemented the video laryngoscope, the non-angulate video laryngoscope, as a first attempt technique to perform intubation for all intubation. We selected, after an assessment, the McGRATH MAC, which allow both direct and indirect laryngoscopy. Then after that, we implemented the McGRATH using a team project, and really all the team needs to be involved. The implementation phase was quite long. During 18 months, it was the pre-intervention period using standard Macintosh laryngoscope. And then we assess the post-intervention period in 18 months using video laryngoscope as a first attempt device. Then we checked the efficacy in real life. So we did a third study assessing the efficacy, and we found that the rate of easy airway was much improved using video laryngoscope as a first attempt device, comparing to another department which was only using direct laryngoscopy.
There have been, over the last number of years, some very high-profile deaths in the UK, in Australia, New Zealand, and perhaps where you all come from, related to unrecognised esophageal intubation. So the guidelines were written to provide comprehensive recommendations to prevent this. And in addition to the technical factors of obviously putting a tube in the trachea, it aims to address the critical role of human factors in preventing unrecognized esophageal intubation, which we learned from in reviewing those cases. But it is unique because this guideline, I think, was of the strength of endorsement worldwide. Every single airway society has endorsed it. This week, the ASA have supported it, the Irish College has supported it, various colleges, the Association of Anaesthetists, so it has been accepted. But I'm only going to quickly run through kind of the evidence for VL. The classification of VL was max style, hyperangulated or channeled. And the max style VL, there was less failed intubation, less hypoxia, higher successful first attempt. And I could show you the lozenges and things, but I'll just keep it brief. With the hyperangulated VL, they did show less esophageal intubation, again less failed intubation and higher success first pass. And the takeaways from the review that VLs of all design that I showed you, the 3 designs, reduce rates of failed intubation, higher rate of first pass success, and improve the glottic view. So why is the debate going on? Then Dr. Ward from, I think, works in Alistair's unit, he wrote this very good letter last week, I think, was it, Al? And saying, debate is good. It makes us look at the barriers to implementation and suggesting it's incumbent upon all of us who think there are advantages and who use it to lead in disseminating the benefits of VL to a wider audience and the adoption of it, and that debate then, only then, can be declared over. So thank you very much, and we'll take the questions now.
If we have a video laryngoscopy, especially combined with the hyperangulated blade, is there still a space for awake tracheal intubation?
Absolutely. And the benefit of awake VL is that we have the requisite skills from doing lots of hyperangulated GA use. And so the transferable skill is there. And I find that our trainees, having already acquired hyperangulated VL skill under GA, and I agree with you, awake should be hyperangulated. I've not had the same success with Macintosh VL awake because of the forces required. But because the trainees have the GA hyperangulated VL skill, they're quite quick to adapt that skill to an awake procedure.
I'm coming from Africa, and you are advocating, I believe, that we should adopt video laryngoscopy for all of your patients, and you believe it's safer for all patients. And so how are we going to leverage the success of the first world, the developed nations, and industry to make sure that we roll out this technology to the whole world, including the developing nations?
It is a challenge, and that is why we, in our PUMA guidelines, we have whenever feasible, and feasibilities, we're working towards this. We've managed with oximetry in, we'll say, sub-Saharan Africa, some of the poorest countries in the world. We haven't with capnography, we're working on that. I did take out a case full of 3D printed VLs with a camera to Africa on my last visit. Don't think they lasted very, very long. But, you know, it is something that we have to work towards.
My question is, what's the role of simulation teaching for these kind of things? Will it improve teaching?
I mean, simulation is mandatory. The thing is, we do not need to simulate. I mean, we need to step before patient simulation. And depending on the device, simulation is very necessary. I mean, when I look at the surgeons, how they were taught laparoscopy and how we teach video laryngoscopy, hyperangulated, we are so poor. So simulation is mandatory, and understanding the device you have. And maybe to come back to the other questions, it all depends on your patients. I mean, in some specific situations, the patients are very seldomly difficult. In some others, the patients are difficult every day. So it depends on the type of patient. But simulation is a mandatory step, and we have done simulation much before we introduced it into clinical use.
How many of you would say you're routine video laryngoscope users? Professor de Jong defined her department as being compliant when they used it more than 66% of the time. How many of you think you work in compliant departments? Okay, so there is a little bit of work to go. I would like to thank Dr. Barry McGrath, Professor Patrick Schuttke, Professor Eleanor Sullivan, and Professor Audrey de Jong. I'd like to thank the sponsors, which are Medtronic. But that is now 8 o'clock. The doors of the food and the drink are that way. Thank you very much.